Let's talk about the BMF match at UFC 300 between Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway. I don't know how you feel about it, but while I am excited to see this fight, there's just some sort of like a wow factor that's missing. Maybe that's the randomness of it. Maybe that's the lack of any sort of significance, or at least my own perceived lack of significance. I haven't quite been able to put my finger on it, and maybe it's a couple of different things, but there's just something big missing, and I feel like maybe that's the case across the MMA community as well. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts and definitely leave them down below. But regardless of that, I am excited to see this fight. There are some curiosities with it for sure, but I do believe that it makes a lot of sense for one of the parties and not so much the other. And in this case, I really think that this fight can make a lot of sense for Justin Gaethje, but it makes absolutely zero sense for Max Holloway. I'm going to break down why I feel that way, but let me start off with this with regards to Max. I think this is a very dangerous fight for him on a variety of levels. Max has been around a long time, and he's definitely taken a lot of damage, and obviously there's only so much that you can stand to take before things break down Tony Ferguson style. And if there's a person he could fight that can dish a lot of damage his way, it's definitely Justin Gaethje. He could wind up with serious damage to his legs, to his face, because as Justin says, when he does something, he causes damage, and that's true. I definitely feel like this is one of those fights that Max might not be the same afterward. Now, I mentioned that it makes a lot of sense for Gaethje, but it doesn't make sense for Max, so let's get into that. The reason that this makes a lot of sense for Gaethje is that, number one, the chances of him sustaining any significant damage in this fight are probably very minimal. Max is not really known for busting people up in a serious way. He tends to win a lot of fights by decision, by outpointing people, and yes, he can cause damage, but if Gaethje escaped his fight with Fiziev without much damage, I don't think he's going to get a whole heck of a lot of damage in this fight with Max. In addition to that, without this fight, Gaethje's really looking at a pretty long layoff before there's even an opportunity for him to fight Makhachev, because Makhachev is obviously talking about the summertime for a comeback, and there's the fight with Oliveira and Tsarukyan, and that fight might be the one that goes first for the opponent there. So if Makhachev fights in the summer against one of those two guys and needs several months of recovery after that, Gaethje might not be looking to fight again until late in the year. So by doing this fight in April with Max, he's going to have plenty of time to recover even if he does get busted up a little bit. The third reason it makes sense is because the BMF aspect is attached to it. Obviously, that's going to possibly bring a lot more money. I don't know how they treat this on the contract end, whether they treat it like a title fight or what, but whatever that is, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of extra money involved, and the fact it's on UFC 300, monetarily, it's going to make a lot of sense for Gaethje to take this fight. The chances of him winning and remaining the BMF are extremely high in my opinion. So he will be in a great position to either roll right into a title fight sometime in the summer or in the fall, depending on how the Oliveira and Tsarukyan fight turns out. So when you go down the checklist of reasons, it's very clear, and virtually every box is checked for him. But unfortunately for Max, though, I think it's the opposite. I think if you had a checklist of benefits for his case, I don't think you'd be able to check very many of those boxes. As I mentioned, I think the odds of him getting hurt and severely damaged in this fight are very high. Max is not the kind of guy who's going to try to take Gaethje down and probably wouldn't be able to anyway, so it's going to be a stand-up fight, and the power difference, in my opinion, is dramatic. Gaethje is going to bust up his legs, he's going to bust up his face, and Max is going to take a lot more damage in this fight, most likely, than he's taken in many of his last fights combined. Depending on how severe the damage is, he may need 6 months or more just to recover from it, which puts him way out of line for anything going on in his division, which we will actually have resolution on well before he even fights Gaethje. I am seeing more and more people with the opinion that Ilia Topuria is going to knock out Volkanovski. And if that happens, Max is right there, number one in line to fight Ilia, and he also has a great style to beat him and become champion again. As a matter of fact, if Ilia Topuria does have a quick knockout of Volkanovski, then his turnaround and ability to fight Max for a title could probably even be at 300, although that's doubtful, but not too far thereafter. That would put him in not only a great position to become the champion again, but also to get that final and fourth fight with Volkanovski when he comes back if he does lose to Topuria. In addition to all that, almost all the fights that he would have at 145 pose less bodily damage to him than he's going to get when he fights someone like Gaethje, who's much bigger, much more powerful, much more stocky and heavy. So even though somebody like Topuria is a dangerous fighter and could certainly knock Max out, it's not going to be the kind of devastation that he would get if a Justin Gaethje knocks him out. So it pretty much seems that it comes down to Max is just a warrior type of guy. He's up for this challenge, and that's all commendable. But from a career standpoint and a pathway back to a title and taking the least amount of damage before he retires, this just seems like the worst possible decision that he could have made. Now, the one thing that he could be thinking is that if Volkanovski does defeat Topuria, that he's still going to be hanging there in limbo and not be able to get back into that title picture. And perhaps that's why he's thinking about going this direction instead. But the reality there is that, yeah, even though he has fought him 3 times already, he's done so much work in the meantime and taken out so many contenders that he's probably due for a 4th fight as it is. So no matter which way I look at this situation, I just think it's great for Gaethje, terrible for Max. And I'd be very curious to know what his coaches and advisors think, even though we'll probably never actually know what their opinions were. So with all that said, I'm going to give you my fight prediction for this one. Now, I've made it pretty clear that I think Gaethje is going to win, but I don't think it's actually going to happen by a knockout or a submission. I think Max is going to do everything he can to avoid getting damaged in this fight, which will make it harder for Gaethje to do what he likes to do to people. And I do think Max will be successful enough at that to make it to a decision. However, I think he is going to take a tremendous amount of damage. I don't think he's going to dish nearly as much back to Gaethje. And so my prediction for this one is that Gaethje wins by a very lopsided decision, while coming away in pretty good condition to be able to fight either in mid to late summer or definitely in the fall, depending on how that situation works out with the title picture. So there you have it. I would love to hear what you think. Do you think that this fight makes sense for either person? And what do you think the outcome is going to be, both from a standpoint of the fight itself and the aftermath? Please leave the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. Have an awesome day. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. See you next time.